to line
We're
it
back
up.
for number 4. Number 4.
L'chaim.
Are we going to finish this up?
Hello and welcome to the HumbleBrag podcast. I'm your host, whatever. This is part 4 of the Zionism topic. So if you're tuning in for the first time, it's a 4-part series. It's a 4-part series. Number 1 was episode 23, where it all began, where Zionism began. That's what we covered in that one. Number 2 of this series was episode 36, and we covered religious Zionism. And part 3 was episode 48, called secular Zionism.
Secular Zionism.
And this is part 4. I forgot what
Don't
we're calling
label it
this.
Yet. Don't call
Right?
it yet anything. You'll see afterwards, because I don't even know. I don't know where it's going to go. It's such a hard topic, even though it really took us a long time to even get here and actually sit down and do it, because we've both been so busy and just doing other stuff. And you moved, and I moved, and I'm here and there and upheaval and all that. But that aside, even if everything was miyushiv in its place and said and all that, it's still a hard topic, because we're going to talk about current state of Zionism, where it is now, out of the outbirth of what we spoke about the last times, and maybe even try to project a little bit where it's going, if that's even possible, because I don't know if it's possible. And even labeling it now is almost impossible because it shifts and changes constantly.
Right. So as we're recording this, we don't have a name for this, but it will encompass. It has to cover some of the current conflict. First of all, this is obviously history. So the past 3 parts were history. Like we really worked through the history of Zionism, and so that you could understand it on multiple levels, multiple fronts. So now we covered the history, the religious, the secular, and now it's like what's left? What's left is what we're in right now.
That's why it's hard to talk about, because especially now, this day and age, in the world that we live in, week old news is so old. It's ancient. Things happen so quickly. A month ago, the war in Russia and Ukraine started. And now a month later, no one's even watching it anymore, because it's like it's old news. Elon Musk just bought into Twitter, so that's
yeah.
It's just so how do you it's easier to be an historian than a prophet, because you can go through and analyze history, and we both tried to keep out our own feelings in this whole discussion, and we both have feelings on the topic, but we really tried to keep our own feelings and emotions out of it, just to lay out the way we see it historically. I think we stuck pretty true to it. Obviously, there's so much more information and so many more people that we didn't even touch on. We tried to touch on the main people, and I think we did. And there's a timeline going all the way back to the Bible itself, thousands of years, until today, and seeing the evolution of the thought of biblical verses and what people do with them, and then when you're thrown out of the land, how you keep it alive, and even an excitement, in the land about Israel, and then the miracle of, 1900 years later, the same people coming back to the land. It's so unique a phenomenon because it's never happened before. So the world kind of doesn't even know how to deal with it because it's so weird. The Zionists that came out of it, obviously, as we spoke about in the last couple of podcasts, I think it's quite clear that the flame and the excitement and the emotion about Israel was only kept alive by religious Jews, because that's what Jews were for the most part. Up till about 400 years ago, Jews started becoming non-religious, and we even spoke about the effect that Herzl's grandfather and grandfather's rabbi and the things that he heard. So he even picked up those nuggets of Israel and Eretz Yisrael and all that from religious Jews, but it was 100% the secular Jews, the secular Zionists, that made it happen. 100%. Nobody can disagree. And that is one of the main reasons why, when we spoke about religious Zionism and the ultra-Orthodox community that is not Zionist, of which there are hundreds of thousands or more, is because of that. That phenomenon of it going from theoretical to actual, and that pu'ula, the act of it happening, not happening by the ideal that should have been, ultra-Orthodox rabbi or rabbis, God-fearing Jews, Shomer Shabbos Jews, kosher-eating Jews. Rather, a bunch of atheists are the ones that actually pulled it off, where everyone else failed for so long. It's a disappointment. It's a letdown. So how do you deal with it? So we spoke about that also, but it's almost like the cause and effect. Because it happened with secular Zionists, the ultra-Orthodox Jews can't accept it. So they're still in as it's, the gullus mentality, as it's called in Ashkenazic vernacular, galut mentality of we're still waiting for something to happen. Something else is going to happen. Something else has to happen. The Messianic era, Messianism, all that stuff. It's not this. What we have now isn't it. Something else. Something else has to come along.
Before we jump into that, first of all, you mentioned feelings. We did try to keep it, as unbiased as possible. I had this argument with someone about, I proposed that history is easy in a sense because it's fact-based, and the person was saying, no, it's not fact-based. It has to do with perspective. And the person seeing it, yeah. Every person interprets history differently. But that's not history. So, and that's the argument.
Narrative of history. The narrative of history.
I was like, history itself is a fact. You either did drink the cup or you didn't. Not, what angle you looked at it from. And that's
where did the cup come from, and
right.
What shape was it,
or how you feel about
how you got it, and how you felt afterwards and before. So there's a story around every single thing in history. What caused the medieval period? Is it just a general backwardsness and Christianity wanting to be backwards, or was it the Black Plague and a third of Europe's population dying?
Right. So that is the beautiful part about doing history and doing this. Now, do we naturally have our own biases? Sure. I might say, it's cool that Israel is where it is today because I'm a Jew, right? But when you're talking about events that took place, you leave that out. Speaking of feelings, I found a place in Beersheba that has, real beer. It's a little hard to find here. Beer is not such an Israeli thing, but I found a place that has real, yeah. Now, if you think about it, it's fascinating that Israel has, gotten to that point where, it's still behind in terms of America when it comes to goods and stuff like this, spoils, right? But the fact that, if you think back a few thousand years, where it was prophesized that Israel would be what it is today, it is fascinating, right? So I might say that because I'm Jewish and I think it's cool. If I was a Muslim and I was upset about the situation, I might not call it cool. But that doesn't take away from the actual events.
The fact that it happened.
Right.
That it happened.
Right. Whether I think it's cool or not is irrelevant. Is it possible to, also before we go there, you mentioned how it actually came to be. The reality, and not just with this, but in general, the ideal versus the reality is often gross. Not necessarily gross, but gross for the people who think it's going to happen another way. the reality of the way that things happen versus the ideal is gross in that sense. It's reality. It's realistic. It happens in a very real, physical way, not in the idealistic way that religious people think it'll happen. Is it possible to run over the high level, 50,000 foot bird's eye view of the last three parts in less than 2 minutes, just to understand how we get to here, and then we could
like a chain of events? Yeah, certainly. Because
the big stuff.
I kind of started out with the anti-Zionists. The anti-Zionists really haven't changed at all. Nothing's changed in the past 100 years, other than a few people getting on board, becoming a little more Zionistically inclined. Even after the Six Day War, the Panovich Rosh Hashiva started saying, this is something, there's some geula going on here, there's miracles, all that kind of stuff. So there were people that their minds changed over a little bit of time, but in general, the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionist, obviously the ultra-Orthodox communities have representatives in the Knesset also, so they're part of the state, but it's not it. This is not what we need. They're for practical reasons, they're part of the state. If we do a 2-minute recap, we started mostly with Yehuda Halevi because he was the one representing the yearning of Israel in music and song and poetry. So that really, like today's song, music, Shakespeare, they represent culture and the society, right? Hollywood represents the society. The 90s, there's different types of movies, and the 80s has different types, and every decade, every century has different feelings of people. So he was able to keep it alive and warm up people, and obviously there's so many different things that went on also to cause it. But he's definitely part of that chain. Ramban, afterward, 200 years later, ends up going to Israel, and other rabbis starting to get a foothold, building a shul. Ramban shul standing until today, 800 years later, it's still standing. It's in the old city. You know what I mean? So this progression of keeping it alive all the way into the 19th century, where it goes from talking about it and being busy with it and crying on Tisha B'Av and like kind of yearning, just still yearning for it, to actual Aliyah starting, the first Aliyah, second wave, and Jews start actually going to Israel, and then with the emergence of Theodor Herzl, Max Nordau, these people that we spoke about last time, things really beginning to happen. Chaim Weitzman, all the people we spoke about, Ben Gurion. You can almost...
It's amazing how many years, we spoke about this then, but it's amazing how many years it was just an ideal, right? Because it's in our prayers. It's in our prayers. So we talk about Israel every day, but nothing's actually happening. Nothing.
It's such a phenomenal concept. That alone is unheard of. To keep an idea alive for so long, it's not a philosophical concept for 2.5 or 3,000 years. That's just a philosophy. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophical. It's an ideology
that requires physical effort.
And then it became real, and here it is. Like we're living in it. We're living in that time. So it's.
So the Aliyah started.
So that's where it is. So that's really where it is now, and it's been that way. But even on that note, I heard once, I'm going to try to put this together quickly in my mind, I think it was Rav Cherki, in one of his books. He says that there's a heretic believer and a believer that's a heretic. And I think it applies here really well to this discussion. I'm not even taking sides. I'm going to still try to keep myself out of taking sides, but it's an interesting idea because it plays right into what we're talking about. The people, Chaim Weitzman, Herzl, Ben Gurion, the people that actually fulfilled the prophecies, right, of the ingathering of the exiles. There's 8 million Jews in Israel today. It's undeniable. They're speaking Hebrew.
Love it or hate it, it's real.
It's real. You know, you can say, no, you know, there's something else is going to happen, a white donkey and an old man with a beard. Maybe. But this is real, and it's exactly as they said it's going to happen. So they fulfilled those prophecies. So he's saying there's a heretic that's a believer, because by fulfilling those prophecies, automatically you're a believer in that sense, that you made those things happen, even if you don't believe in God or, you know, the Torah's from Sinai and all that. Then, on the other hand, you have a believer, someone that's a religious Jew, davens 3 times a day, believes in God and all that. He's a believer,
nothing.
but not only does nothing, he'll say that the Palmach created the state of Israel. The IDF won the 6-Day War, not God.
Right.
So you're a believer that's a heretic. So that's how he juxtaposes those two things. You know, God runs everything except for this. He didn't make this happen. It's these
right.
Secular Jews. So people need to keep that in perspective as well. It's something to remember. It's definitely something to remember. So in regards to the anti-Zionists, they're basically the same. Nothing's changed for them. They're very conservative.
You mean the Jewish anti-Zionists?
Not big on change. They're waiting for, you know, a miracle or something to happen that may, hopefully, I don't know, or not, or whatever, something. It's out there. It's like the jury's out. We waited 1900 years. We'll wait another 1900 years.
You're talking specifically about the more of like the ultra-Orthodox.
Orthodox.
Because there's also progressive anti-Zionists that are influenced by American politics and stuff.
That's a whole different topic. Yeah.
So you mean the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists who believe that
the
Israel...
ultra-Orthodox belongs to the Jew. They still believe in Israel, just like Jews believed for 1900 years. They want to go back, but they believe in the idea of wanting to go back.
So you have to make a distinction there because you also have the progressive Jews who are Jewish by blood, but they're completely, you know, like American progressives. They don't believe Jews have any right to the land whatsoever, and they don't care for it. So there's a huge spectrum.
Right. That's why they're not so much in the discussion, because they don't really have any conflict. They don't really have a hardship. They see themselves as American. They happen to be Jewish. They're, you know, and that's it. Maybe they'll visit Israel once in a while, but they don't really have such a hard time with this this pull, this tug of war. You know, what to do with Israel? Do we have to go to Israel? Do we have to defend Israel? Ultra-Orthodox Jews do, because they still believe in Israel. They believe in the land.
And there are about what was it, like maybe 2 million of them, but not all of them are, and not all ultra-Orthodox are anti-Zionism. So
no. Most are really ambivalent. They'll tell you they're not Zionist, because it's a pejorative. It's kind of like a bad word to be Zionist, which all it really means is that you believe the land and the state is ours, it's ours. That's what Zionism believes. It's the state of the Jews, for the Jews. So they really do believe that, but they don't want the label Zionism because it has that negative connotation of secular Jews, non-believing Jews, It has that.
Again, the ideal and the reality. The reality is when you have a democracy, you're going to have freedom like that.
You're going to have that. So it's a big internal conflict of what to do. How do you deal with the fact that millions of Jews in Israel aren't religious and, don't participate, even though 70%, will keep Yom Kippur or Pesach, Matzah, no chametz, and that kind of stuff. You see, okay, so this can lead us into this conversation of Israel society, where you have, let's say 1 million ultra-Orthodox, probably another 1 million, religious Zionists in Israel. So big chunks of society. It's not a small margin by any means. And there's a constant tension between the secular and the religious in Israel till today, from the beginning till today, still. In regards to religiosity and democracy, like a Western democracy, how you mediniyut of running a country, government, all that kind of stuff, involvement of government. So it's been there's been a tension constantly, but there has been a status quo for many years on how things are run, what things the rabbinical the rabbinate is in charge of, and what things the government's in charge of. It's not as separate as America. It's a separation of church and state at all. And now, specifically, you're really seeing where the tension is rising even more. You just saw last week the government. That's why it's such a hard thing to talk about, Zionism, because really Zionism is identity. And the founders of the state, the secular founders, and Herzl himself labeled it as a state for the Jews, right? We spoke about his book. Das Judenstaat, the Jewish state.
Right.
So, it's specifically a Jewish state. It's not, it's not a, it's a homeland. It's a secure place. It's a response to anti-Semitism. But it's a Jewish state. Now, if you do like the health minister said last week, that public, hospitals and public buildings are going to allow chametz on Pesach, which until now they didn't. Comes Pesach time, only kosher Pesach in hospitals. He's saying you can bring chametz in. So a religious Zionist Knesset member, that woman Silman, she resigned from the government. So it's almost toppling the government. They're down. They don't even have a majority anymore. They had that thin hair of a one person over the top. She's saying that's too far. Now you're messing with the identity of the state. You remove this, remove that, then it's just a Western country. It's just a secular country. What uniqueness does it have as a Jewish state? And if it's not, this is exactly what we're talking about now in the postmodern world. What's Zionism? What makes it special? What makes it uniquely Jewish? If it's just going to be like America or London or Antwerp or Switzerland, nothing. Those things go away. Those special things that are uniquely Jewish that no other country has. So that was enough for her to resign and pull out of the government. So
the consensus is that if it continues to progress like in the U.S., then it's just a modern country. It has no identity. Then the whole Zionism thing itself could become less of a topic. It means nothing. As someone that's living here now, especially I'm down south, so I'm amongst a lot of Bedouin and Arabs, and
a lot of issues going on there too.
It is. From the positive side, there's still a strong Jewish identity that permeates the entire country on every level. Granted, it's slowly going away, right? It is slowly going away because as you progress, as you just discussed, it goes away. But at the same time, it is a democracy, and all types of people live here and live peacefully, relatively. Besides for the attacks that happen all the time, that's extremism. But for the most part, the day to day, I mean, it is like America in that sense, where any type of person could live here and live in peace, and that is the reality.
And they do. So the question is, first of all, is it even possible to have a Jewish state, if you're going to call it a Medina Yehudit, a Jewish state, which makes it, however you want to label Jewish, it's an ethnicity or a nation. According to the Torah, we're a nation. Goy is a nation. You're a nation, because anyone can join, anyone can be part of the Jewish nation, regardless of what you look like, background, anything. And there has been over all these years, all types. So we're definitely a nation, but we're also an ethnicity, and also like a family. Also, it's just like it's small, so it's very.
But all those concepts are
homogeneous.
All those ideas are slowly going away. Like if I had to speculate, I don't see a future, because the whole world is intermingling and and less segregation of any kind, and that's just where the world is going. So nothing to do with Israel. It just doesn't seem like that's long term. The whole idea that there's that state or that person or a group, any type of group, their state, their country. I know there's a lot of arguments on that topic, whether we want to retain identity and groups, and all throughout history and evolution, it seems like there was a huge utility there, right? But it does seem to be slowly going away. Who knows?
So the question is, what do you think about this? Do the Jews have a claim to the land and the state without Zionism? Since the Arabs, you could say, were already there, right? That's their claim. We're here. We're here for 1,000 years. You were here 2,000 years ago? Mazel tov. You show up now, you throw us out. So we claim, because we have a background and we have evidence and documents that we were there, it's our land, blah, blah, blah. God, promised it, it's ours. And so we have, you have to point to the past in order to have this claim right now. But without that, what claim do Jews really have to the land, to the state, to the place? And
I think the conversation of having a claim, the topic itself, is because it's still very raw, right? We only got the land a little while ago, less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's still a very hot topic, and that's why we approach it in that way. Personally, I think saying that we have history here, then it's just a tit for tat. So that's a meaningless dialogue to have, because then the Arabs,
I'm talking about the religious aspect, not just the history. I'm saying about the religious aspect.
Yeah, I'm saying when you have those types of conversations, it's not productive, right? I'm just thinking about, like,
you're talking about ideological conversations.
Yeah, like,
or historical.
When groups say, like, the Muslims will say we were here 1,000 years ago, and then Jews will say we were here 2,000 years ago, and then you have these types of conversations. I don't find them to be they're not productive. I personally, and I'm just the type of person that says we have to deal with reality.
Productive.
So it is what it is right now, and you have to figure out. You have to accept it's the same exact thing as like the Native Americans would fight and try to reclaim it. It's not happening. So we have to just, like, move past it. America has, Americans have America. Jews have Israel. We control it. We have support from more than half the world. We have to move past that pain. It's easier said than done. I'm not taking away anyone's pain. I'm just saying this is the reality. It's not changing over and out. Now, I get why we can't do that, because we're only 70 years past. It's not 300. But we will eventually get there. So those are not productive conversations. Productive conversations are how to deal with the bigger problems that we have now, like
so how about, like,
citizenship, right? Can we give everyone citizenship?
Let's stick with Zionism. How about the postmodern kind of post-Zionist time that we're in now?
What about it?
Zionism in the early days was very exciting. You're building a country. Your father remembers Ben-Gurion as the prime minister. He's the founder. He did the declaration of the state. Maybe you knew Chaim Weizmann or Herzog or this one. This is the beginning. These are imagine knowing George Washington and Jefferson and Adams, and so, like, you're new and it's exciting. It's a new project, but not like you said. It's 20 to 50 years later. It's like whatever. Now we're just Americans, and whatever goes. It's not
It's not as exciting anymore.
It's not as exciting. You don't feel like, I'm tilling the land. I'm building roads. We're
here for 70 years. I'm drinking sour beer.
There's high tech that's huge. There's Teslas in Israel. So you almost don't have to fight for it anymore so much. I want to get to the conflict with Jews and Arabs also in that context. That's more of a sociological topic that I want to get to, maybe a little further. But just in this regard, like, for the religious Zionists, it's still very important, because we spoke about them also quite a bit. Rav Kook, his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, and then that whole, generation and the next generation that came out of that, they serve in the military. They're dedicated. Rav Lezer Melamed from Har Bracha, he's a Rosh Yeshiva there. He holds it's the greatest mitzvah in the Torah to serve in the military, protecting 8 million Jews, fighting for the land of Israel. So it's alive and well. Zionism.
The irony about the ultra religious, especially the ones that are anti-Zionism, is that by the time they concede, if they ever come around to conceding, that it's time, or this is our land, or that we could take it now, or that it's ours, or whatever it is, however they go about it, in a certain sense, it's going to be too late. In the sense that the country, because the people who, it was hot news 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, and 70.
They're going to wake up in 50 years and become...
They're going to wake up when it's already America. What do you... Oh, yeah? Yeah, you could have the land?
Let's fight for it. Let's go back to...
It's over. The country is modern and it's progressing, and it's way beyond whether the ultra-religious think that we could be here now or not. Now we're already dealing with hot issues like, are the Arabs going to overpopulate the Jews, and what does that mean? Those are real today issues because of security and the way that they say that they want to wipe us off the map and all these stuff, these ideologies that we're still battling. Those are real modern day issues. Not whether this rabbi or that rabbi. It's done. Half the Jews already here. There's 5-6 million Jews here. Nobody cares
and even from the ultra orthodox point of view, from the regular, the Haredi, the Hasidim, the Litvish world, all that, all of their, because they're very big into Gedolim, the great leaders of the generation, they're all in Israel. There aren't great Rosh Yeshivas, and there's a few Rebbes here and that, but I'm talking about from the Litvish point of view, the people they look up to, like Reb Chaim Kanievsky and that, they're all in Israel. Like the top tier Gedolim are in Israel. So even the leadership and the people that they go to and they run to for questions and whose rulings are supreme are all there. So even Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah is in Israel too. It's in Zion. It's in Zion.
You know what this reminds me of?
It's almost like whether they like it or not, it's like it's all there. It's there. It's happening.
I used to hear from Laser Brody, who he was probably repeating it for somebody else. He used to say things like, like now's the time. By the time you wake up, or like the Mashiach and all these concepts, it's going to be too late. And I'm now seeing that perspective in a very realistic way. Not this like it's going to be too late because there's no electricity and airplanes are broken. It's going to be too late, meaning if
you're missing
American
that window,
Jews
that moment.
to make any impact, it doesn't matter if Hasidim, ultra-Orthodox in 100 years from now from America decide now is the time. You have no impact anymore. You have no control. You have no say. You have nothing. The country was already established. When it mattered the most.
You can change now. Make
right.
Those changes, come in, have an effect. Look, there's
that was, and it still is a little now, but it's becoming less and less. It's a strong country, strong infrastructure, and
so what that shows you that a strong ideology, even if it's an anti-ideology, like kind of like the way they talk about anti-racism, in the world now. So it's anti-racist, anti-Zionist is an anti-ideology. This sociological event of the fact that there's, I don't know, probably at least 1 million religious Jews here in America, at least,
right,
who are phenomenal. There's a phenomenal success, huge business, millionaires and billionaires, and just like, the infrastructure, it's amazing. But the fact is, because of your anti-ideology, you're not on board with history. You're on the sideline in your fancy house, but you're not part of Jewish history. Almost, you're the Jews that remained in Persia after Ezra and Nehemiah take the Jews back to Israel to go rebuild the first temple, second temple. He goes to rebuild it. The rich Jews stayed. They stayed in Persia, and there was a Jewish community there for the next 2,000 years. So they kind of sat it out. Meanwhile, the Jews that went back rebuilt the Second Temple, had another kingdom, had another,
Right. Occupy Wall Street. Protesting and cheerleading is great, but meanwhile, you have the people who are actually, you're standing there protesting the rich guys. You're not getting rich in the meantime.
You're not getting rich.
It's those concepts, right? You could stand on the sidelines, cheerlead, and yap and talk, and also I would say for American Jews, in the beginning of this episode, we talked about not having opinions, but this final chapter, you can't talk about what might be or what is without all these opinions. So obviously we're getting into our opinions here, l'chaim to opinions.
Right. That's why I said it's going to be a very hard episode
because we're no longer talking about history.
Now it's perspective in our time.
Right.
Right.
American Jews, rich as they are, and the success and the luxury and all that stuff. I think a big part of that, part of the anti, is the excuse for that life. I don't think a large majority of even ultra-Orthodox doesn't have to be ultra, they're never moving to Israel. Part of the excuse, a lot of it is excuses.
Yeah,
which you see, by the way, every time there's anti-Zionism or something. People run. Yeah, you see that a lot.
They're talking about it running, like, if it gets so bad in America, I'll move to Chula.
These types, for all intents and purposes, are never going to Israel. And the excuses about how bad this and the anti,
and also,
right? It's all excuses. They're never coming.
So tying that back into what we said, it's almost beneficial for them that Mashiach hasn't come yet. To their idea of what Mashiach is. Because once he comes, then you got to move into an apartment building in Bet Shemesh. And you have to give up your 14,000 square foot home.
So I have no issue with that. I understand. I see it from a historical perspective, and it is what it is. But just stop with the 3 times a day Yerushalayim, blah, blah, because you're not interested. You're not coming. There's nothing. Even if there was a white donkey and a white beard, you're not coming. You'll have excuses then too. It's all BS. And those who do it. So like we were saying, you're either part of it and you're part of the revolution. And by the way, everyone who's part of it influences and shapes it in a certain perspective. That's why I was saying, if all the antis were part of it from the get-go, imagine how different the country would be, maybe with 10, 50 million different types of perspectives. Right?
Picture that.
It would be in a different place today, 100%, because the butterfly effect, everything changes everything. But you weren't. Right. You were on the sidelines with signs. Okay. Well, now you're not part of it. And by the time you want to be part of it, you have no impact. You're meaningless.
So how about secular Jews who their parents were Zionist, very Zionistic, building the country, kibbutzim, and part of the project, religious, traditional, secular, doesn't matter. Now you have the children, many, many millions, the vast majority of Israelis, who are secular, many of them traditional, to various extents. Some of them keep some Shabbos, some do Kiddush, some of them go to shul a little bit. All the, kippah, no kippah, all the different Yom Kippur. So a lot of people do Yom Kippur, a lot of people do Pesach, everyone does Hanukkah. Like all these things, it's traditional, it's Jewish, and it's beautiful to see, regardless of your level of observance. It's just a nice thing when you come to Israel, and it's Jewish. Yom Tov there is Yom Tov. So what about their post-Zionism? Because they're not they're not the anti-racist, they're not the anti-Zionist, but it almost moved past the point where you need to be Zionist because it's just a country. It's a place. It's modern. It's, varying degrees of, you can call it successful. It's pretty successful as far as the Middle East goes.
You're talking about preserving Judaism and
Zionism.
Zionism?
No, I'm just specifically talking about Zionism in itself.
You just said
they still do Jewish
You just said that they almost have to be Zionist. Why? To preserve, otherwise it's becoming modern. And are you saying that through
I'm
Zionism?
Just talking about, okay, so here, let me frame it this way. how do you say irregardless? No, well, regardless is irregardless, right? So regardless, I'm saying, but why do people say irregardless?
I don't know.
Regardless is irregardless. Just hit
Never
me.
thought
That's
about
just-
that.
It's a double entendre. People say
What do they say?
irregardless.
Double negative is a
Irregardless.
positive or something?
Yeah, I don't know. It becomes regard again.
Irregardless of regard. Yeah, that's
You
weird.
don't say
Never
irregardless.
thought about that.
So, just hit me. Regardless of their levels of Judaism, because there is, and most of them do stuff. I'm talking about their Zionistic fervor in the state, the belief in the state, belief in the Zionist project, the same as their fathers and grandparents who
Yeah,
came.
we talked about. You're saying they're slowly losing it. Are you proposing that they need to not lose it? They need to be.
I'm asking what is it going to do for the state when you have just Jews who aren't Zionistic? They just live their people.
But that's why it's inevitable. That's why the vision that I see is inevitable, because when you have full democracy, American type of democracy, which Israel likes mimicking and is always behind, but is like copying in that respect, that's just where it's going. That's where the world is going. If that's where the conversations are in the world, that's where it's going. So you can't stop that. People are just not fired up about something that they already have and don't care about. You know what I mean? They don't care.
So the only preservers, if you think about it that way, the preservers
are the
of
religious.
Zionism,
that's always.
Hold on, not even the religious. The religious are going to still maintain it as a theoretical.
Yeah, no, but you realize it's the same thing.
Just like 1,500 years ago.
Don't call it Zionism. At the end of the day, it's the religious who push forward.
But it's the seed. They'll
religious
keep the
ideas.
Seed warm. They'll keep the seed warm. Just like they did for all these years that gave birth to Herzl.
And it's the OTDers who do something about it.
But also but the religious Zionists are still Zionist.
For sure. But it's different, like, right, it's just part of the curriculum, it's ashar, it's being taught, like.
No, ashar is American religious Zionist, not the same as the Israeli. We kind of separated that also, like, just like Haredim in Israel are not the same as the Haredim in America. We're not the same.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying over time, it waters down.
Even calling the ultra-Orthodox in America Haredim is wrong, in my opinion. Knowing the Haredim in Israel, we're nothing alike. Nothing alike. Everyone works here. People, it's not the same, But so even calling the Ashar types religious Zionists, it's still not the same as somebody living in Moshav Eli or going to Hesder Yeshiva, whatever. It's not the same boat. But either which way, it keeps it. They're the ones that are going to keep Zionism going into the future. The Haredim, the Frum Jews, will just basically continue as they've done up until now, waiting for something to happen, and davening and hoping. Very good at hope.
But if you observe, if you observe the landscape like we're discussing it, essentially what's happening is that even the antis, but the ultra orthodox, are preserving Zionism. Don't think about the word Zionism. They're preserving the ideal traditional religious concepts, because the moderns stop caring about, once we achieve something and we're moving on to other issues, you don't care anymore about it anymore.
Right. So that's the switch that happened for the religious Zionists, the modern Orthodox who are Zionist. You have the state already. Now, how do you make it better? How do you build on it? How do you
security? Yeah, it's done.
Right. We're there. I have even Rav Sherky, who he's my Gadladar. He's busy mitzvahs b'nei noyach. He wants to attract non-Jews to become, religious and to do mitzvahs and stuff like that. Because now you have a bigger project. V'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachos ha'adam. God told Avram, just like you have the land, then all the nations of the world are going to be blessed through you. So now it's your job. We got the land. So now he wants to start fixing the world. It's that Indian of Tikkun Olam and all that kind of stuff. So you're seeing, you are seeing some of that. So, but I do believe that the secular Israelis will not have any Zionism in a generation or two.
Right. That's why I was
saying. I'm not saying any religiosity. I'm talking about the Zionistic fervor for the state.
That's what I'm saying.
That will
They're
go
gonna
away.
they're gonna mix it into the curriculum. It already is heavily, but it'll get more and more watered down, like you see in America. And that's what it's gonna. It's like a tradition. It's like you talk about the land, the flag, the this, the history. It becomes like a trivial matter. The religious are the ones that are always pushing it because it's Chumash. It never changes. So it's hardcore. It's ancient. It's archaic. So you keep on thinking of it in that way. That's what it's ultimately always.
But is it important? Is it a baya? Is it a problem when the majority doesn't believe in the state anymore as strongly as their parents or their grandparents? Maybe like here in America, you kind of see like a decline in the United States and the empire of the United States because people don't really care in the uniqueness of America, and what made America a great country was America, Americanness. So if you remove that, there certainly is a decline in America. It's not the same, and it's going to be not the same as we move on into the future.
There's a big argument that there was
always. What do you
always
think it'll do in Israel?
Because it comes down to this fundamental argument: is like, can Judaism survive and thrive and continue without ultra orthodoxy and extremism? And that's what it comes down to. So a lot of traditional thinkers don't see a way forward because it's always the ultra-Orthodox that are pushing those traditional values, like we discussed in the Knesset and politics. If you don't have those types, then it automatically goes more and more. There's no way to know. History is a funny thing, but think about it. The ideals that we had are already halfway or mostly achieved, so we're not worried about that anymore. I personally think there might be a way. But it's a much more modern and realistic way for Judaism to continue. Like the types that I live around here, kippah, no kippah, they show up at shul regardless, whether they wear kippah during the week or not. I don't see that as something that's dying out. That's strong, and they're as into that as Hasidim are into being Hasidish.
But I made a distinction. I didn't say they're Judaism religiosity levels. Do you understand that I'm specifically talking about their Zionistic fervor, belief in the state? I'm not talking about, kippah, going to shul, Hanukkah, Purim, holidays, Jewish stuff.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just drawing that parallel because it's the same exact concept.
But that's not going to go away, right?
It's the concept of, does an idea die out if you become chilled out about it because you already achieved it, or can it stay alive in a certain way? I think it can stay alive. I was just drawing that parallel, but it just looks different than what you think or the intensity that you have about it. It's just like every religion, Christianity,
Renaissance, they go through the
Muslims. It still exists for thousands of years. Judaism, it still exists. It's just very different than what it looked like in Beis HaMikdash times. But it's here. It's modern, but it exists. And I see that just across. A lot of people don't see that. They think if you're not ancient about it, stone cold, throwing stones, stoning people to death, it's going to die. I don't think so. I think it just evolves. And the same thing with Zionism. So it'll be in curriculum.
You're optimistic about the future, regardless of the intensity of the Zionistic belief.
It'll morph. It morphs.
It'll morph into something different, something a little different, not as intense as it was, because it's already not as intense as it was. You get you hear Bibi talk or this or that, and he can still talk about all the history of the state, and his father knew this one and that one. It's close to him, but once it
dies out.
It goes away. His kids care less. They care about TikTok and other stuff.
And new fundamentals are formed because it's like the Constitution. Like we look to that. The Constitution is only a few hundred years old. And it's the same thing in Israel. You make these new rules, these new fundamentals, and then those become. And then in a few hundred years, a lot of those rules are no longer like you have to change those. But it just like morphs. The religious fervor and the ancient way of approaching it, like it's this way or no way, that's exactly what the Arabs do. That's the Arabs that are killing people on the street. That doesn't work anymore in our world. Extremism doesn't work.
So since you mentioned Arabs killing people on the street, like we just had now, ongoing for the past week and a half, I had a thought about that also in regards to the stability of the state in this postmodern, it's almost like a post-Zionistic time for a big segment of the state of Israel and Jews in general, even though there is still quite a bit of Geschmack Zionism going on. I'm looking at it this way. As long as there's an enemy, right? It's very important. We all know sociologically, historically, as long as you have an enemy, everyone can rally together against the enemy. You need an enemy. After 9/11, it was clear, who the enemy is. Everyone was united. We're going to go to war. We're taking down Iraq, even though they had nothing to do with it. But they were very good at galvanizing the American people, Bush, Cheney, all these people to start all these wars. We have an enemy. They took down our buildings. They killed a couple thousand people. We got to take him out. America hasn't been united like that since then. It's a disaster now, the partisanship and the infighting and all that. The melting pot is melting.
Right.
In Israel, I feel that as long as you have an enemy, the Arabs, they're the enemy of the Jews. They're trying to kill Jews for 75 years, even longer, going back even before the state. Jews are united on that front. Secular Jews, religious Jews, all types. Everyone pretty much backs the IDF, except for the real extreme fringes of ultra-Orthodox society. They'll yell at soldiers or throw stuff at them and stuff like that. But everyone else is really on board for the most part. As Israel begins to start making peace, and they've made peace with certain countries for 40 years. Egypt, there's been no wars since 1979. Jordan's been a pretty tentative peace from the mid-'80s. Those are countries, but you still have the Arabs living in Israel. Right before, Bibi and Trump, the Abraham Accords, they made peace with a bunch of other countries who now have opened diplomatic relations with Israel, UAE, Dubai,
Right.
other countries. Talk about Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's a great thing. But then I started thinking that if you make peace with all your enemies, and if, let's say they figured out a two-state solution and the Palestinians are happy, then maybe the Jews start turning on each other. And it's a real thing. The ultra-Orthodox, they get, now we start fighting. Shabbos, shutdowns, buses. Now it becomes internal. Because we spoke about it last, I don't remember which episode, but we spoke about, there's a first destruction. There's a second destruction. There's been destructions of the state, internal fighting. That's how these states fall. Yeah, there's an outside, empire that takes you over, but the Civil War by the Second Temple destruction killed 1 million Jews. 1 million. The Civil War and the starvation, and they were burning down their own stores of food.
Yeah.
Just to force people to go fight. And what, we think we're past that? We're not past that. And Menachem Begin, when he was bringing in a ship full of arms to help fight the British before the state, Ben Gurion's people, he had that ship bombed and taken out because the factions of the Palmach were fighting each other. The Lehi, the Etzel, this one, that one, they didn't get along, the Haganah. Ultimately, they became the IDF after the state, but initially they were fighting each other, politics. So he blows up the ship, kills people, Jews. They killed Jews. Yitzhak Rabin was involved in the shelling of the ship. Sinks the arms, sinks the guns, the stuff they desperately need. His boys wanted to start a war. They wanted to start a war with Ben Gurion's boys. Haganah, they're going to a civil war. He wouldn't let them because he knew history. He said, we're not having a second destruction here. We're not having this kind of civil war. It's not happening again. So he took it on the chin. And until he didn't win democratically, parliamentary, in 1978 or whenever it is, He wasn't part of the government at all. That was the first time it became a right-wing government. It was in 1978 when Begin finally won. So he understood history. But you see, right now, just if we're going to cover like the state of Israel, anytime it's quiet, and there are lulls between Arab attacks. Because the last time there was a string of attacks, you had the stabbings. Remember the stabbings a couple years ago? Every other day, stabbing Jews. And then, they crack down hard, and then it goes away, and then every once in a while there's a thing. So in between, when it's quiet, you'll have people fighting about the women of the wall. Let's go protest these women. They want to daven at the kotel. We're going to go scream. That's the issue, women going to daven at the kotel.
Yeah, it's sad. It's very sad that when things are relatively good, that's when there's turmoil.
Fighting.
Sure, that's when there's turmoil internally because it literally stems from like boredom. It's like a mixture of boredom and not having other objectives. When there's a common enemy, there's a common objective. You stay busy with it.
You can unite against them.
But that's not here nor there. That's just psychology. That's just the way humans behave, and it's stupidity.
So maybe, but since it's psychological and it's human, maybe in a sad way, it's almost important to have this enemy just to keep the Jews united a little bit and not killing each other. Is that a weird thought?
Well, thoughts are thoughts, but humans need to, it's the same thing in the U.S. The level of sheer stupidity that goes on in politics and the types of things that come up and become big issues are a display of a country that is, I shouldn't say too well off because you always want to improve the world, but this is what it looks like. This is what freedom looks like, unfortunately, because people don't have goals in life. They're bored. They're lifeless. So, hey, let me stand on the street sign and cry about whatever the next, stupidity is. I don't even want to mention any of them. They're that bad. They're like, it's unthinkable. And then when there's war, now we have an objective. You forget about all the other stuff all of a sudden. So, but the state of Israel, so we did the history, so we come into now times. Obviously, the Arabs are not pleased. They want the land. Al Jazeera likes calling it the occupied occupied Palestine. What are they? I forgot what they call it.
Yeah.
But they make sure to throw the word occupied in there. And that's what the conflict's all about. It's essentially, we have it, they are here and want it. And the whole discussion of a two-state solution, we've chewed over this a million different ways, which I try to always go from a little bit of a bigger picture. Because sure, you could talk about the ins and outs of a two-state solution. No. There has to be a little bit of a bigger picture, a bigger perspective to look at if it's even possible to solve this issue and what the bigger issues are. And one of the big issues, as I mentioned earlier, very little bit, is that they literally breed. They have children at rates that far exceed us.
Yes.
So
the two fastest growing demographics are Arabs and ultra-Orthodox. And religious Zionists also have big families, but
so one of the big issues, tentative issues, are that first of all, if you make them all citizens and you allow them to run in the Knesset and the most powerful places as much as Jews,
they'll outvote you.
And you still have places that are literally openly calling for the destruction of Jews, not just not just Israel, but all Jews. We're still, unfortunately, in a place in this world where you can't let that happen, right? You have somebody there saying kill all the Jews, and then you have those very same bloodline of people who could potentially take over the country legally. You can't let that happen. So, we are stuck in a place where it's not racism or whatever you want to call it. We're stuck in a place where we have to make those hard decisions and keep it segregated.
A rock in a hard place.
Yeah.
So I don't see any way out for that. Even to talk, you could talk about it for ad nauseum, and you're not going to figure anything out because nobody's figured anything out. You can go back to the Kahana view of throwing the Arabs out of Israel, but that's not going to happen.
And what about the idea of actually giving them a piece of land? My qualms with that is, and allowing them to form another state, my qualms with that is that we've seen through history is that it doesn't help. It does not help to give up land. We've done it. So all this BS that if you just give land, it's going to be great. It's not going to be great. We already know.
Right.
I don't think there really is a solution in that respect. I think the conversations have to change, but unfortunately, I look at comments. What videos that I just watch? Like you could watch Al Jazeera could report on the stabbings, and I like watching that side. And you read the comments.
They report on it.
Yeah, for sure, because you understand it from the other perspective. I know how we look at it. So if I'll watch it on Al Jazeera, and then I'll read the comments too. And just amazes me to there's the Muslim population is huge, a ton of Arabs, and the extremism on that side, the way that they'll just condone violence and just blame it on the land. Oh, the land. Like I said, imagine Native Americans were just slicing up Americans and say, "Hey, you took my land, right?" But we're still like in this infant stage, like we're babies when it comes to this notion of what took place and moving on. Grieving. We haven't grieved enough. We're just not quite there yet. The fact that you have like a huge majority of people who will just like justify slaughtering innocent people, and so we're not in the place where we could have real productive conversations. The type of conversations like Rudy Rachman is having. I'm not saying he. I don't know if his perspective is 100% sound, and if he takes all the political repercussions of his idealistic ideas into there is a reality and then there's ideas, but switching to different types of conversations is where I think it's inevitably going to happen. It's the only way this is going to get solved. In other words, I think we're going to reach unity through this weird way, and it's going to be bloody on the way to it, and there's no way to avoid it. It's just like impossible. Like I think we have to reach some kind of unity and peace in the world, and we will. Unfortunately, it might be past our lifetime when it actually gets to that, and so many more are going to die. It's because we're just not there yet. We're not at that place where they could enjoy having a peaceful. The people who want, who are on both sides, they're just not there yet. Of having, let's look at it from a different perspective. How can we live in peace? How can we? But I think that's where the world's going. So again, I don't know.
So you actually saw that exact thing that you're saying now. We actually saw work when you change tactics completely and come from a whole different direction. We saw it with Trump and Bibi. When for 65 years, two-state solution. Let's work on this. Let's do it this way, that way. Roadmaps goes nowhere. President after president, peace with the Arabs goes nowhere. There's jihads, there's intifadas, there's killing, there's bombings, all that stuff. Trump comes along with Kushner and Berkowitz, and they say, you know what? Let's do it completely different. We're not going to talk to the Palestinians, not even negotiating. We're not even talking to them. Cut off their money. Don't give them any money. Let's start making peace with Israel and Arab countries. Let's not make it a discussion about the Palestinians. They don't even want to talk about it. So they go and they make peace with Dubai and the Emirates and other countries, and everyone's saying, wow, like you can actually, everyone assumed until then they don't want to make peace with Israel because of the Palestinian issue. And they showed, you work out some business deals with them, they'll do it. And they did do it. The problem is it still hasn't taken away the Palestinian issue. The Arabs inside of Israel are still unhappy, and they're still fetching, and they want something. I don't know. Maybe they don't want a Jewish state here to begin with. If you go Moshe Feiglin's route, or it's not about them having a state. They don't want you to have a state here. but the
I
state's
believe
here.
that's true. What do you mean? The
Jewish state's here.
They say that
Finished.
openly. They want
They do say it openly.
They want Americans and Jews dead. Everyone from the Western
That's
world.
why the Trump team was saying, so we're not
not
talking to you. We're not. Just go make peace with Saudi Arabia. Go make peace with other Arab countries.
Yeah, that's huge, by the way. That demonstrates.
It was huge. It was phenomenal. He should have gotten a Nobel Prize for it.
It's unthinkable, but I think that demonstrates. So what happens is, as you're saying, the issue is still here. But what happens is, if you continue to think in more creative, business-minded ways, you circumvent and then when you narrow it down, and it's just Iraq and Gaza and 5 different entities, not 100. It's a whole different ballgame. You basically slowly narrow it down. There's no way. Look, they have legitimate complaints. I understand that Arabs in Israel, they don't have the freedoms that we have, but we discussed the paradox there. You can't give them that freedom, or else we're dead.
They're murdering Jews. Yeah.
So, it's a hard place. So you can't solve that right now. We could agree on that. But you do see that creativity. Now imagine that continues to. Imagine everyone just stops with the BS. We love BS. In politics, we love BS. Fantasy.
Yeah.
All day fantasy. And they carry the fantasies for decades. Stop. You saw, like you said, Trump, right away. No fantasy. And then you got some done. Keep on doing this. Stop with the fantasies. That's what I was saying. This is the reality. We're not going anywhere. So stop entertaining this to any country. Israel's not going anywhere. It's not happening. There's no two-state solution. That's not happening. Find ways to make things work. And when you do, you see some progress. So I just think inevitably that's the only way. It's the only way it's going to happen. Unless something big happens. If a war breaks out or something very catastrophic happens, that's unpredictable. But and by the way, these types of things, they don't get solved in one lifetime. Probably not going to be solved in our lifetime. These things could take hundreds of years. Now with technology and the way that things do move quicker. But this could be way bigger than us. We're just a little tiny part of it.
Either a surprise can happen and something quick will happen, or it can just take 300 years to somehow straighten out. I don't know. I don't know.
But anyway, that's like a little bit on the conflict. But if you go back to Zionism, I just want to say that, whenever there is politics, because Zionism, there's that division even within the Jews themselves, like the support of Zionism or not the support of Zionism. And then people point to the notion that half of the Jews or a certain portion of them disagree with Zionism, so therefore there's some kind of valid argument. Whenever there's a political body, there's always division. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with Jews or Zionism. There's always going to be division. Right. Trump and Biden and the other 2/3 of the country who hates him. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It's not a local problem. So these arguments that doesn't matter who is opposed to it. The fact is, Israel is a modern country. There's a political body. There's a system, and there's politics, and there's fighting, and there always will be in any democracy. So that's completely irrelevant. It means nothing to me if Jews in Israel agree or disagree. And Zionism is like this big, scary word, but truthfully, Zionism and the government, I think there is a separation there. Meaning, not there's a separation conceptually. Like a lot of Orthodox Jews, like they're not pro-government, but they're pro-Zionism in the historical sense. Meaning, I believe that Jews should be in Israel. Like, so you could say I'm a Zionist in that regard. Do I agree with the government the way I know nothing about politics? I couldn't care less. That's not my problem. It's not my fight. I'm still a Zionist in the religious sense, meaning I'm the person who prayed 3 times a day, but also went and made the Aliyah. So yeah, I believe that this is our country. We should be here. We need our own place. We get killed everywhere else. I don't know anything about the government. Yeah. What do I care about the government? It's just like the American administration. So I think it often gets like mingled, like pushed together, right? Meshed, but there's a separation there. I think all Jews
Okay,
should,
so let's
all religious
let's
Jews
work on
should
that.
be Zionistic government.
So,
Okay.
let's work that idea a little bit. Let's flesh that out. Let's flesh out that idea. So, first off, what I'm understanding from you, and I didn't think of it so much in that way up until now, and it could be I agree. It's not a bad idea. That number one, I used to think of it negatively. Post-Zionistic world. You know, same way as like we're like in a postmodern world, we're moving into like a post-Zionist world. In Israel, you know, the fervor of the Zionism, and you're saying it achieved its goal. There's a state. We got it. We have the state. Zionism created Medinat Israel, and here we are. It's modern. It's flourishing. It's doing better and better. It's
And
got
think
a
about this
strong
one.
army.
Think about this one point. How many people that even you know who are anti-Zionism are actually just anti-government? They're not anti the Zionistic idea originally.
But they put it all together.
That's
For them, it's one.
I see a big issue there.
But first, I'm talking about Zionism in itself. Let's say that we are moving into a post-Zionist era. You're saying that's fine because Zionism achieved its goals. Let's look at it that way. The goals were to create a Jewish state. We have a Jewish state. So Zionism can like fade away into history now. It doesn't really matter so much. We have to govern here. It can still be a Jewish state. It can have all that stuff.
Yeah, because Zionism to me it was that
is that
praying times a day and then moving to Israel.
And here we are.
But don't forget that obviously there are some millions of Jews in America who they believe that wasn't Zionism, right? They have their own way in which it was supposed to happen. But
Fine,
I'm saying forget about them. It's done already. For us, it's already done.
Right. So I'm okay. That's an interesting idea. That being post-Zionistic is okay because that goal was achieved. As far as government versus how did you put it before?
Government versus Zionism.
Right, the government itself versus Zionism and Judaism. When it's all tied together as one thing, then people will say, you know, obviously, from Jews they're not going to say they're anti-Eretz Yisrael. They're going to say they're anti the secular people running it.
They say they're anti-Zionism because they're equating Zionism with the government. I'm saying
with that,
really, Zionism is an idea. The government. Doesn't matter if you have this government, that government. A government's a government. You're gonna, right?
You can have a third of the government with yarmulkes from Jews. It's not. You know, this happens to be, you know, whether it's a religious
the way it played
government
out
or a secular government. That's how it plays out because it's a system like that. So, you know where you see that playing out. So we can touch on COVID a little bit. The Zionistic. The Israeli response and all that, where you see the religious Zionists, similar to the modern Orthodox Jews in America, also equate the state, the government, with Zionism. And they had a really strong belief, they do have a very strong belief because the government is the manifestation of the biblical, the prophecy, and the state, and Medinat Israel and all that. So the government, for them, also plays a strong role in Zionism. So again, we're back to like the anti-Zionists, mush it all together, and the religious Zionists also mush it all together.
That's why when I look at the ultra-religious who are anti-Zionist, I actually see them as Zionists because they actually believe in the core fundamentals that Jews have a right to Israel. They have a right to
Israel
be there. It's
belongs to the
their
Jews,
land. That's the principles.
Their land.
Their complaints are about how
You're
it
just saying
formed,
it
the
has
government.
to happen different. It should have happened this way.
Nobody cares what how you think the world should manifest. This is
God
how it
definitely
manifests.
doesn't care.
Right.
This
You know what I
is
mean?
how it happened.
So you're sitting and crying that it didn't happen the way your book said it's going to happen. Well, I'm sorry. But you still believe that you belong there, or you're still praying. So very interesting distinction.
So you had in what was it 04, 05 where Arik Sharon did the Gaza disengagement. He pulled the Jews and the IDF out of Gaza, and they threw out all the Jews living in the whole strip. Okay? Big controversy. It was terrible, especially if you're Zionistic in the old sense, giving away land. You created a terrorist state right on your doorstep, and it's been a disaster ever since, with rockets flying and all that.
Yeah, giving up land doesn't help.
Over there, we saw like one of the first cracks in not so much a crack, but that conflict, that tension of the religious Zionists who are officers and serve in the military and all this stuff. They believe in the state really, really strongly. They have to follow orders that go against their sensibilities because they don't believe in giving back land to Arabs. But now from the higher ups are coming down, you got to go throw your cousin out of his moshav in the West Bank from Gush Katif. Right. And they did it, and they followed the orders. And very few of the rabbis even protested because this is it's almost mishichi. It's messianic in a way that this is it. You got the state. The state is the fulfillment of these biblical prophecies. How do you go against the state now? The state's ordering these things. The state has a right in its own sense to do these stuff. And there was that, and there still is that, and there's still tension because of that, and people accusing and upset at each other because of that. Now during COVID, you also had, they just went along. The state cracked down really hard and went nuts with, masks and distancing and 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot, 4 shot, one of the strictest COVID regulations in the world. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel, for the most part, went along. Some people, not like here in America, the ultra-Orthodox went along for 2 months. That was it. Most people didn't vaccinate. Most people, everything's been open here. Cares. Literally since 2 years ago, Shavuos, we were locked down for 2 months. Remember they said 2 weeks, flatten the curve? We did 2 months, and then it was over. There's been weddings, bar mitzvahs, parties, stores, no masks. None of the kids are wearing masks. Because again, we don't believe in the U.S. government in a messianic way. We have to live here. You have to be peaceful. You have to follow the laws and all that. But if the laws are retarded and they don't make sense, we're not listening. We have a scunim that'll go, they can call the governor and get special permission that our kids don't have to wear masks in school. And they did. And they weren't wearing masks. And they're not wearing masks for 2 years already. Right. Meanwhile, public schools, they just took them off like a month ago.
Yeah. Welcome to the party.
In Israel, they went along fully. They listened to all the regulations. They were strict. They're still wearing masks. I still see them on YouTube. They're still... So it's interesting that the ultra-Orthodox and the religious Zionists who are ideologically so opposed in one way bring it together in the same way. They believe the state and the thing is all one. Zionism and the state, and they also believe Zionism and the state are all one. Interesting juxtapose connection.
Yeah. So obviously these are
which Arabs also do, by the way. Arabs too. No, Zionism and the state is all one.
These are forward-thinking ideas. So I know that even in government they still mesh it all together. But this is more of like a philosophical view of it, because if you think about it, technically it's separate. Whatever government rules, whatever government body there is, that could change. It does change. Not so much in our hands. Zionism.
It's momentarily.
Today it's this, tomorrow it's that. It changes. Zionism never changed. It was the ideal of the land.
It's one idea.
And by the way, so the idea was achieved, and I must say that it was a very lofty idea, right? We thought it was an outlandish idea, and it gave us fuel for unthinkable amount of years.
It's crazy, yeah.
So now that it is achieved in this regard, we kind of, it's slowly going to fade, and we have to we need new objectives, because with everything, it's done and over with. Now, granted, half the world hasn't accepted that yet, so we're still going to fight about it for another 50, 100 years, blah, 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 but it's done. There's no going back. Just like America's not going back, Israel's not going back. There is no undoing
going
it.
back.
So it's like, how quickly could we shift into a whole different mindset? And you see it across the board, like you're demonstrating. The Arabs, the government, the religious, the non-religious, everybody likes to mesh it all together, but it's not really. Most Jews, especially religious of any type, are Zionistic in the traditional sense. They might be anti-government, but that's a whole nother grief. They might be anti this government, but if the government was, that's all politics.
Even a Meisharim Jew, you talk to him about Eretz Yisrael, and it belongs to us, and it's ours.
Right. It's a Zionist.
Sure.
He's a Zionist.
Which is a Zionist.
You don't like the government? Okay. Who does like government?
Okay. Everyone,
right.
Yeah, exactly. No one likes government. But it's a necessity.
And that's pretty astonishing, the way that the government functions, and the sheeple here, the way that people go along us. Because I traveling back and forth, even during COVID, you go to Muncie, New York, you don't see a mask in sight around the Jewish areas, even in the non-Jewish, but especially in the Jewish. Here, all day, Masechah.
So what does that come from as a phenomenon? I don't know if it has so much to do with Zionism, even though we're talking about Zionism, but since we're talking about Israel, why
I think Israeli, the main population here are still vaginas, pussies. That this whole never again, these notions, bullshit.
But shouldn't Jews be the first to rebel against this kind of dictatorship? You're persecuted for 1,900 years.
Bullshit.
You have no trust for government. You have no trust for authority, and they're just going along.
Yeah, no, it's the way we were nurtured for the past 1,900 years.
So
you could say never again all day, but meanwhile the government's telling you to do something retarded, and you're just doing it without nothing. I go to shul here across the street. 95%. Yeah.
Wow.
In a bumblefuck town in the middle of nowhere.
I haven't seen a mask. When I went to Israel, I had to put a mask on a couple months ago. But
unthinkable.
Since then, before then,
and nothing. The government says you do, and so that's a huge contrast.
Why did? Okay, yeah. I mean, it's a whole nother time. You know what? Let's we can even like stop here. Let's record another hour on this topic. You can release 2 different podcasts at different times. Just cut
so the question is,
let's talk about that.
The question is about, so let's just say this episode is current Zionism. Think for a second now obviously we're not getting into...
Call it that. I was
thinking
current,
postmodern, today.
Post-Zionism, but we're not post yet. Call it current Zionism.
Current Zionism. And the question is if we covered... Now, obviously, we went into a lot of our ideas surrounding a little bit higher level.
Name. Call it United Zionism.
Yeah, promote some some wishful thinking.
Because you saw how many ways we tied. Like ultimately, everyone's kind of Zionistic.
I'm very forward thinking, so I have also these very forward thinking ideals. So yeah, I do think it's kind of like Rudy Rachman in a sense, even though certain ideas
I don't watch him too much.
Might not align because he's a little, messianic for me, but in the sense that he's, a little bit too forward, a little too optimistic. But I think those types of approaches, I also think in those ways. And I think those are the only ways that could work in our society, because our society is very progressive and forward. So we have to think of ways, not that old-fashioned tit for tat that never ends. So I think we're approaching a different way. No, but the question is, if this was current or United Zionism, but current denotes the notion that we're talking about today's Zionism, we did the history. We didn't really get into current Zionism in the sense, like in the historical sense of the past, let's say 10, 15 years, but we did touch on ideas behind it. The question is if we covered enough in current Zionism to call it quits here. Take a second to think back about this series as a whole, what we just discussed over the past hour. Did we cover everything that we want to cover in the current sense, from more of like an historical perspective, if there even is a historical perspective?
We can do. Let's do the whole post Six Day War revival of religious Zionism. So you have the 6 Day War comes along in 1967. Okay, so between 1948, when the state's founded, the first war. Okay, terrible war, very hard. Jews that lived here, a bunch of refugees from Europe, survivors of camps and all that, literally dumped off boats, clambering up. They're given a gun, go attack Latrun. Right. You know, it was a slaughterhouse. It was terrible, but they held on. They were attacked from Egypt from the south. They were attacked from Jordan. Tiny ramshackle state with no professional army, and they hung in there and survived and carved out quite a bit of a piece of land, except for the whole Yehuda v'Shomron, as it's called, the West Bank, as it's known, in the Western world. Gaza was under Arabs. The whole Golan was under Syrian rule. This is how the 1948 armistice ended. So picture the Golan overlooking the whole north of Israel. Picture like Tzfas and Tveria and all these cities with a lot of people.
Right.
It's the breadbasket of Israel, literally. I mean, with the farms, there's beautiful farms in the Galil, all under Syrian guns sitting up on top of them. So that's how it was for 20 years. From 1948 till 1967, the middle of Israel was a corridor that wide, 20 miles deep.
Yeah.
From the West Bank to the ocean. They have to squeeze by, the Jordanians. It's crazy. It was terrible. The old city of Jerusalem, all under Jordanian rule. But the Jews, like we said, these are the original Zionists. They're building. They're focused. There's intellectuals and there's laborers and people coming in from Europe and focused and building, head down. We're creating a country here. And then there's a couple of flare-ups in the 50s. You had, in 1956, the Sinai campaign and other wars and little bits, little campaigns going on between Egypt and Israel and here and there. Meanwhile, Israel's, building up an army, training, buying aircraft, whatever they can get their hands on. They're putting together a military. 67 comes around and the Egyptians are putting together they block the straits of I forget, it's off the top of my head. We can look it up a second if we want.
The canal,
and not the Suez Canal. They blocked the straits of. It was a waterway that was an international waterway. They shut it down. They mobilized their military on the border of Israel. You have to remember the whole Sinai Desert was under the Egyptian rule at that time, and they're just lined up on the Negev, 50 miles from your house. 100,000 soldiers, tanks, terrifying. Little tiny state, just barely survived 20 years ago.
Right.
Jordanians, Syrians. How do you fight a 3-front war with a brand new little army? Tension for months, and they decide we're going preemptive. We're attacking them first. Take out their pre-dawn, June 6th, I think it was, airplanes. First thing, bomb all the airfields in the whole Sinai, Egypt. All their planes on the ground. Jordan, Syria, as far as Iraq, bombing airfields, airplanes. The Jews had supreme air supremacy. And that was it. It was a wipeout from that time on. 6 days, it's over. They took over the entire Sinai Desert, took over the whole West Bank into Jordan, took over the whole Golan Heights. They're 15 miles from Damascus in Syria in 6 days. A wipeout, a miracle. It was unbelievable. Huge excitement in Israel. Huge excitement. Now you have all this new land. Negev, all the way down to Eilat. It's amazing. It's huge. It's now the country doubled in size, more, tripled with the Sinai Desert. So massive excitement. There's a resurgence Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who's the son of the original Rav Kook, the leader of the religious Zionism. His students and his people, after the 6-Day War, is like, we got to settle the land now, right? This is our mitzvah. This is what God wants. So there's a big, up until that time, those first 20 years, religious Zionism wasn't really much. They were living in Jerusalem, they were living in Tel Aviv, other places amongst there. Today, everyone knows the settlers, the whole settler movement. When did that start? When did that happen? After the 6-Day War. Now they're moving out all over the West Bank, building towns, cities, yishuvim, villages up and down. So and till today, there's a lot of flare-ups, a lot of fights over it. You got Anthony Blinken coming and saying in Israel how settler violence, that's the issue in Israel. When's the last time they killed 11 Arabs in a week?
Right.
Settler violence, right? So it's like, same thing here in America. When you talk about the KKK, white supremacy is the biggest issue in America. It's the biggest. That's what they'll say, right? They say it all the time. The progressive, Biden, white supremacy. When's the last time they burnt down a city with BLM riots? But let's not look at what's actually going on. For a year straight, they're burning down cities. White supremacists. That's the issue in America.
Right.
So the same thing's going on in Israel. Right? Settler violence. That's the problems in Israel. Who are these settlers? These are students of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. They promote this wild messianic ideal based on the prophecies of the prophets that all these lands and all the whole Gaza area, beautiful communities grow up. Dekel, Gush Katif, greenhouses, they're building and growing. I was there. I was there before 2005 because I was visiting Israel. I got to go. There was a concert in Gush Katif, Avram Fried, Miami Boys Choir maybe. Took a bus. I got to go to the Gaza Strip. Little town, outdoor concert, beautiful, amazing. Gone,
just drove out
uprooted,
there,
gone. They destroyed. Yeah, you were right near the border. So
I was
these
just checking it
towns
out
were
the other
inside.
day.
These towns were inside of the Gaza Strip. And you know what? It kept the peace. It was quiet. There was no issues from Gaza. No problems. You took the Jews out. You gave them a state. And now you have this. Rockets, wars, fighting,
right.
killing.
And why would we think that would be any different if the Palestinians get their own state?
So this phenomenon, this resurgence of this religious Zionistic fervor really became manifest and really strong after the 6-Day War, settling all these places in the West Bank. And now you have a ton of communities. Efrat, Gush Etzion, all these yeshivas, Har Bracha, on and on and on, up and down, all over. Just beautiful. And you go into all these, they're so nice. Neve Daniel, Elazar, Nachliel, where I have a cousin living, beautiful religious. You have non-religious ones, religious ones, traditional ones. Beautiful. The most beautiful parts of Israel are in the West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron. It's ancient Israel territory. That's where the kings of Israel lived. Achav, the Israelite kings. The prophets, Eliyahu, Elisha. This is where they ran around in these hills and these mountaintops.
Close enough to get to Jerusalem within a day.
Yeah. So that created this settler, mentality and phenomenon. And it's as strong today as it was then. You have these guys running around, popping up little makeshift little things, and then they get uprooted by the army and thrown out, and they fight them, and they, little tit for tat back and forth, nothing crazy. Every once in a while, it is terrible, like they'll burn an Arab house down or kill some Arab or whatever. But again, rocks flying on them all day, hitting
in
cars
that regard,
and shooting at them.
You see that the fire is still burning by many. Because people are doing this deliberately.
Yes.
So the Zionism fire is still, we're not post
Exactly.
Zionism
So that was
yet.
one of the points that I wanted to point out, that it's really strong in certain areas. You go to Tel Aviv, Dizengoff, it's like being in Berlin,
Right.
other than they're speaking Hebrew. But you go to places like that, Gush Etzion, that's biblical ancient Israel, and it's burning strong. It's strong there. It's beautiful. It's
The
nice.
Jordan
It's nice.
Valley is also so nice.
Stunning. All that was captured in the 6-Day War.
Looks like New Zealand, almost.
It's stunning with all the palm trees and the dates and all that stuff. It's absolutely incredible. So, in that regard, it's as strong as ever. It's very powerful. It's very strong. You go to Bnei Brak, it's not Zionistic, but it's Jewish. It's religious. There's shuls. There's yeshivas. There's, they're continuing on what they've been doing for 1900 years, head down, just moving forward in their own way. But, there was I think it was a Chaver Knesset or a female Chavira Knesset recently that said something about the Haredim are the ones like keeping those coals burning, keeping the fire. Because again, in their own way, inherently they're Zionists, but because they correlate the state, the government with the state and all that, then they can't be Zionists because Mashiach didn't come yet. But inherently, they're by learning and doing the stuff, they're keeping the Judaism flame going strong.
Yeah, that's what my
And then you got
opinion
these
was.
people,
They are
and
the
you get the people
Zionists,
out
even
the
though they're
West.
anti-Zionism.
Yeah, but they keep the coals burning, and you need people keeping the coals burning. It's just as important, and that's why they should be reckoned with, not dismissed out of hand because they don't want to serve in the army, and you know how we feel about that, and all those things, because they do fairly well civic duties, just like the Frum Jews here in America. You go to Lakewood EMS, it's 90% Jews. You go to, besides that Salah, I'm talking about the EMS from the township, the fire departments, bunch of Jews, Muncie too, all over, all over Israel, Madas, tons. I have friends, guys with pace like this. Mada, you have, doing civic duties.
You need all
helping,
types. You need all
part
types.
of the state. They're
need
not
scholars.
dismissing it out of hand. You need scholars. You need
scholars.
Workers. You need garbage men. That was Golda Meir's fear that we mentioned also in one of the other ones. She's like, she couldn't believe that, you need jails even. It's going to be a Jewish state. It's a bunch of good people, everyone getting along. We're family.
Right.
No, you need a police force, and you need jails, and there's going to be criminals. And you need, as Rav Kook said, he called it a tzibur. A tzibur is a community. Tzadikim, Beinanim, Urishayim. And that's how he saw it. He was clear-eyed. Everyone plays a role. Everyone plays a role in this project. To him, it's a project. To him, this is a fulfillment of an ancient text that's happening in his time. Even though he didn't get to live to see the state happen, he passed away before. But you have righteous people, you have regular people, you have not so righteous people, and everyone plays a role.
Yeah, it's part of being realistic. Is understanding.
Being realistic.
It's
But again,
realistic.
in his time, and maybe even today, but certainly in his time, he saw it so clearly, and he wrote about it so much and all this stuff, but no one else did. Like all his contemporary great rabbis are not on board. They're like, no, this is not it. This can't be it. It's not Chaim Weitzman. He's not the guy to bring the Geula. And he's saying, yeah, well, it's happening. It's happening.
Right.
It's like they're pushing an agenda. We got the Balfour Declaration. The empires of the world are recognizing the Jews' right to return to Israel. Let's go. Let's get on board. And they couldn't get on board. Yeah, I'm reading a text now. I'm reading a book from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The last one that passed, his father-in-law. So the two Lubavitcher Rebbes ago. This is like 1920. Okay, so picture 1920s. He has sets of books where he writes like his thoughts. It's very interesting. They're like stories of like stuff going on, not like Rabbi Nachman's stories, these wild parables that have phenomenal deep layers and meaning. Here it's just stuff that he did. I went here, I went there, I spoke to my father, the the Rebbe before him. We did this, we did that. We went to Russia. And when he writes about leaving Russia, he writes Chutz La'aretz. I was studying it with Mati, and he's like, Chutz La'aretz? I'm like to me, it was simple. Like I got it, what he was writing, but Mati was like, what do you mean Chutz La'aretz? He lived in Russia. I'm like, yeah, they referred outside of Russia as Chutz La'aretz. Like Russia's the homeland. But you see, what 1900 years, and to them, Lubavitch is Jerusalem. You know?
Right.
You know, Uman is the holiest place in the world. Berlin, Shamshon Raphael Hirsch called Berlin the New Jerusalem. They were so enmeshed and so embedded in the gullus mentality that we're talking about that, like, you know what? This is it. Like,
it's fascinating.
It's a new level of Geula. We're in here. We traveled to Poland, went to Chutz La'aretz. We went to Chutz La'aretz.
What's interesting about Rabbi Nachman is that, you know, he was fascinated, right? He was obsessed with Israel, and he told his followers to be.
He traveled to Israel.
Yeah, right.
It changed his whole.
I guess he couldn't be buried there. He wanted to be buried in Oman, but like he like
it changed his life. His trip to Israel, it changed his whole Torah, changed his whole world hashkafa changed. Everything changed on his trip to Israel.
Yeah. So current Zionism, I guess you could say, is what the world is today. It's a modern democracy that I think is a little bit past the Zionistic ideal, because it's already a reality for a lot of years.
You almost don't need it anymore.
The truth is, and that's why we're not getting into it. Yeah, no,
no, but that's what I'm feeling from you.
When people talk about modern Zionism, talk about politics, and I'm not going to talk about politics, so there's nothing to talk about. Right?
That's entertainment.
Current Zionism is what? Is that there was a stabbing attack, and we're going to talk about all the ins and outs of the day-to-day of living. No, this is already a country.
Practical. There's a stabbing attack. Take care of it. You have a problem, fix it. It's a state. It's a country. It's running.
You have a country. You've been here for 70 years. Accept it, because it's not going anywhere. Find a way.
You're almost saying like it's unnecessary, because I used to always still think that no, because like the way Moshe Feiglin talks, but he's really more he's talking about currently. He puts Zionism and Jewish identity together. See, he's doing what we talked about. He'll see the government also as Zionism and Jewish identity. Zuhut. The name of his party was Zuhut, identity. He says without Jewish identity, you have nothing. You're just a secular country who the Arabs have to remind you every once in a while that no, you're Jews and we hate you. He says this is what's going on.
Jewish identity and Zionism, I do think go together. It's one concept, but that has nothing to do with government.
Right. He's putting government also together because he's a religious Zionist. So to him,
happens to be this group of people who turned the government are the ones that implemented this whole move and made it fine. And if it was someone else, they would also be. Then they would be the government, and then half the other people would be against them. So,
right. No. I think he's accepting any ruling government as part of this project, Zionistic project. You're saying separate the government. They just happen to be people who have to rule and make laws and function. Make the country function.
You need them, and it doesn't matter who it is. You're always going to have division on it. Governments and politics changes frequently. All of that stuff are variables. Zionism is not a variable. It was a principle. Right. Everyone agrees about it.
In itself is a principle. It's an ideal. It's an ideal way of Jewish thought.
It's part of our Jewish.
It's a Jewish consciousness. Consciousness.
That's what I'm saying. It's part of Jewish identity. Absolutely. Everything is Jerusalem, our state, our place. And now on top of all of that, we already achieved it. And now it's like you want to talk. So if somebody says like, no, current Zionism is politics, that's politics. Zionism is the conversation's over. Maybe it's for somebody in America. If there are people talking about Zionism to motivate people to move, great, sure. But for people who are already here and have been here for 70 years or 50 years, it's not a conversation anymore. This is life to them. They're living. They're going to the Beis HaMikdash. Like the ultra-Orthodox were always apprehensive about physical,
skeptical,
getting,
conservative,
doing, physical doing.
Doing.
And they're always behind. Base of English is not going to build itself. We're either going to lay bricks or it's never happening, right? Messianic ideas, they're not going to implement themselves. Either we learn to value peace or it's not happening. Like everything is physical.
If you want to usher in an era of
physical.
peace, right? Ushering in an era of peace. Even that is the prophecies and the all that of this messianic era, which is a peaceful time when the animals will lie down together, the lions and the sheep and all that. We have to want it. You have to be ready to do it. If you're busy fighting with 20 women that want to go daven on Rosh Chodesh because they want to put a tallis on, and you're freaking out, and you bus in busloads of girls to come scream at them, well, then you're not ready for peace. Right. You're not ready to coexist as Jews.
I think we are starting to see, though, glimpses of it. So what you see now, for example, Russia and Ukraine, that's the opposite of it. But what about the fact that Ukraine itself is trying to be more of like a modern country that's accepting and more democratic and all that stuff? So you see certain countries, and a lot already have become, anyone could live there, there's freedoms and all this stuff. So we are seeing what messianic peace could look like, although then, as we discussed, then there's a vacuum, and then people start fighting amongst each other but that's human. That's human.
What I'm afraid of. That's what I'm afraid of. For some reason, even though we've moved into this postmodern era, and Jewish history and the world history travel parallel, Jews kind of like the Jews go in and out of it. So you can find books, thick, long historical books. History of the Jews. What do you mean history of the Jews? Just write history of the world, and you'll talk about Jews the same way you spoke about. No, we have our own history that touches into the general, because it's so weird. It's such a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's such a phenomenon. So we keep going in and out of world history. Talk about the Black Plague before. There shouldn't be a chapter in the book about the Black Plague about Jews, but there is. There might have been 50,000, 100,000 Jews in all of Europe in 1348. Nothing out of 50 million Europeans in 1348. And there's a whole chapter about Jews being murdered and killed because they were being accused of causing the plague, poisoning the wells, and doing all that stuff. So you have an entire chapter about a tiny group of people, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
About an historical event that wiped out a third of Europe. 15, 20 million people dead in 2 years. And
Jews have a huge part of history for various reasons.
And not even of our own accord. Jews get dragged into it. In Switzerland, they're killing entire towns of Jews because they're being accused of poisoning the wells. In England, in Germany, raped, murdered babies, women, pregnant women, sliced open. It's horrific. It's horrific. It's barbaric. It's the medieval period. Why are Jews even a topic? They're also dying from the plague. But that's why we always shift in and out of history.
And even nowadays, in this modern world, with our tiny little country,
15 million Jews in the world, and
Jews are at the center
every
stage.
Newspaper all
Right.
day. Why?
It's just, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to go anywhere. We just have an impact. We make an impact. We're a big part of all of it. You're starting to cut out a little bit, so I don't want to risk having you cut off. So
listen, now that we're set up twice a week.
Hell yeah. From my perspective, we went through all the ins and outs. We went through a lot of it. Yeah. I'm happy with current Zionism being
that's good.
The proposal to move past to everyone. We should start separating, because there's the identity, there's that principle that we had for 2,000 years, we
that
achieved
got
it.
us here. But it got us here. So the reluctance on the part of the religious Jews of giving that up, I get it, because it's what got us here. But you're saying, you cried for so long to get there, and you got here. Like, let's go, let's get on the roller coaster.
Everyone, the anti-Zionists, the Arabs, everyone has to accept the reality.
We have to recognize reality for what it is.
Recognize the state. Now, if you're anti-Zion or anti the government, if that's your beef, the way that the government, so move to Israel, get involved. There's a lot of religious people in the government.
Yes.
Push your agenda. Do things the political way, the way that everything runs in the world.
I agree.
But there's Zionism, and then there's government. If we could separate that, and everyone but I understand it's not going to happen. These are ideals. It's going to happen over hundreds of years.
But it can happen. Even the military aspect, how they're always saying how the military is so anti-religious and they're not accommodating. Stick 50,000 yeshiva bachrim into the military. They won't have a choice.
Right.
Take over the damn thing.
Right.
Let's go. But that's what American Jews would do.
But that's why I keep on saying that, usually for some reason ultra-Orthodox they're just very hesitant to get physical with anything ever. It's all ideals, and
it would be so good for the boys. It would be so good because you see the ones that do join and serve, and there's videos and there's stuff. They come out. You're serving 18 months, 2 years. You did your service, whether you believe it's a mitzvah or not. It's certainly a good thing. It's certainly not fair in the term of fairness. You have all the secular mothers that send their kids. All the religious mothers don't send their kids.
There's nothing better. There's nothing better that a 17, 18-year-old could do in this world at that age than join the military.
Nothing.
Learn discipline. Do physical, hardcore physical stuff.
You come out
there is nothing better.
Responsible human being.
There is nothing better. They get educated. Everything.
Mati's going this summer. He's signing up. He's finishing yeshiva. He's going.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah.
All right. Let's wrap it up. Very cool.
If you enjoyed this topic, please subscribe. We're going to work on other series. I'm thinking maybe like philosophy or different stuff.
Yeah,
we
like
have getting into the kishkas of stuff.
We have stuff coming up. Yes.
Definitely get with it.